Today's AskReddit post. What's the most bizarre historical fact you know? Oh boy, this is gonna be a good one. Let's get started. Albert Einstein was offered the presidency of Israel on November 17, 1952, following the death of Israel's first president, Chaim Weizmann. He declined, saying he lacked the natural aptitude and the experience to deal properly with people to do the job. Smart fellow. Vikings went as far as modern-day Morocco to fight as mercenaries. The Byzantine emperor had his Varangian Guard personal bodyguard, composed mainly of Norsemen. Harald Hardrade traveled the rivers of Russia to join the Varangian Guard. He raided the length and breadth of the Mediterranean before returning to the north and make himself king of two nations, by right of blood and battle. Then he invaded England, and became the second of 3 kings to die in that land in that year. His life was basically a metal album, only without the slow and quiet bits. I had no idea he was that badass. I literally knew him as the guy who tired out Harold Godwinson's army so they got won by William the Conqueror. When FDR died in office, the Manhattan Project, atomic bomb, was so secret that his vice president didn't even know about it, and upon taking oath Truman had to be briefed on the existence of the bomb. So this is actually something major we have to learn for A-level history. The fact that Roosevelt only trusted people who created the bomb with the information that it existed, emphasized how powerful the bomb was. However, if you want a bizarre fact, then when the Americans created their most powerful explosion, Castle Bravo, the Russians literally laughed and told them they can do better and created something over 3 times as powerful. Tsar Bomba. Biggest duck in history imp. The little boy that the US dropped on Hiroshima was roughly 15 kilotons. The Tsar Bomba was 50 megatons. 1 megaton equals 1,000 kilotons. 50,000 kilotons 15. In other words, the Tsar bombs is 333 times as powerful as the weapon we dropped on Japan. Let that sink in. And what's even more mental is that the Tsar Bomba was a prototype. Its yield could have been doubled easily if they had added cesium. I think it's cesium anyway. The other prototype is currently sitting dormant in a nuclear weapons museum in Moscow. We could have done the same thing, but in true American fashion, we built a shit ton of smaller ones and put them on top of items a lot faster. During the Apollo 8 flight, astronaut Commander Frank Borman came down with a stomach bug and ended up vomiting and shitting himself at the same time. There was barf and diarrhea floating around the space capsule, and the other astronauts had to put on gas masks to block the stench while they cleaned it up. I'm a similar vein. On a space mission, I can't remember which one, before vacuum toilets were invented, a crew member took a shit and didn't bag it up, resulting in a fat log floating about the cabin. On the mission transcript you can see that there was a discussion about who did it, and no one ever owned up. In 1767, when British Captain Samuel Wallis journeyed to Tahiti to trade, his crew found that the natives would exchange iron for sex. As a result, the crew began prying iron nails and fittings from anything they could find, to the point Scott had to end the trip early because the crew had begun to remove the nails from the deckboards and beams, literally taking the ship apart in harbor. And I thought I was thirsty. You'll never know true thirst if you've never seen Tahiti women. Never have I ever agreed with such a comment before. Nero would make people sit around listening to him badly play the harp for so long that some of the men faked death to get out of it. Anyways, here's Wonderwall. Nero got a lot of revisionist slander after he died. Maybe he was bad at music, but really hard to know because most people hated him for all the other shit he did. He was basically trying to live a rockstar life of drinking parties and music, which was unbecoming of the emperor. I don't fault the lad for trying to play music, and must have been real hard to get honest critics. All that aside, he is accounted to have done so much bad shit there's no version where he isn't an asshole. Nero got a lot of revisionist slander after he died. You calling me a liar? Apostrophe. George Washington spent roughly 15% of his money on liquor, maybe due to the fact he didn't know dinosaurs existed. I, too, am often driven to drink at the thought of large, mysterious reptiles, or the absence of that thought. The first US conscript of World War I was the father of the first US conscript of World War II. Conscripts were chosen at random for both wars. This is some Stanley Yelnats shit right here. All because of their no good dirty rotten pig stealing great grandfathers. I can fix that. Suck it, Sean. She needs me. That a rebellion attempt in Venice was thwarted by the deadly aim of an annoyed grandma with a mortar. Woolly mammoths and ancient Egypt coexisted, and during the Hellenic era, lions could have been found in Greece, awfully convenient for Hercules. Hercules was like 1,000 years before the Hellenic era. Hellenic era was from after Alexander to Rome. The most isolated tree in the world was in the Sahara Desert. It was hundreds of miles from any other tree. Its roots extended hundreds of feet down to water. In the 1970s it was hit and destroyed by a drunk driver. Imagine being the guy that hit the tree with your car. When the state of Ohio had only 2 cars in it, they got in a head-on collision. Murica, duck yet, friendly fire pioneers. There was a point of time where there were only 2 cars in all of Ohio and they managed to crash into one another. Important edit. I would like to add that I have just now realized that this is much more general than informative to those who want to know more about the topic. And I would like to apologize for spreading potentially false information. Please refer to the comments below, as others have provided sources that are more specific on the matter and explain it with more depth and detail. This happened in Cleveland. It's also considered the world's first automobile accident. The first electric traffic light was in Cleveland also. Well, I would hope so, since apparently it was necessary. The man who survived both of the atomic bomb attacks on Japan. Tsutomu Yamaguchi was on a business trip in Hiroshima on the 6th of August 1945 when the first bomb was dropped. Being no more than 2 miles away from ground zero, he suffered multiple injuries, but survived. He eventually managed to leave the city by train to return to his home in Nagasaki. On the 9th of August, Yamaguchi showed up to work and was telling his bosses about his ordeal in Hiroshima when the second bomb was dropped. Although he was a similar distance away from the second blast as he was from the first, Yamaguchi miraculously survived again. Gets a nuclear bomb dropped on him and shows up to work 3 days later. Japanese business people are something else, man. I'm Japan. Sometimes if you do a bad job, instead of firing you they just take away all your duties. You just show up to work, do nothing, go home, and still get paid. It's supposed to cause shame but sounds like a sweet deal to me. They used to do this to teachers in New York too. My mom's a teacher in Texas. Her principal has been consistently shit for about a decade now, and she's finally gotten fired. Really, they just gave her some made up job and are keeping her on the payroll. I assume so they don't have to admit they ducked up. Teacher politics are weird. One of my favorite ones is the fact that Kim Jong-il was a big movie buff and at some point he was just fed up with shitty North Korean films, so he just ordered this director from South Korea to be kidnapped so they could have cooler films. Pulgasari. The story about how that movie got made and the resulting escape would make a great movie in and of itself. It looks like a documentary was made about it in 2016. It's called The Lovers and the Despot. Martin Luther hallucinated demons in the bathroom all the time. Good God. For a second I was thinking of Martin Luther King. I am so damn stupid. I totally duckin' did too. What a terrifying dream. When X-rays were first discovered in the 1800s, people found that if you held an X-ray tube up to your eye, you'd see something akin to fireworks. This is a result of the X-rays hitting the molecules in your eye, then exciting the electrons to a higher energy level. When the electrons fell back to their base state, energy would be released in the form of heat and visible light. The light being emitted was what people saw. They had no idea that radiation was harmful. Thus, X-ray tubes became commonplace at parties of rich people. Edit. While this blew up 50% of my karma on a fun fact. Thanks so much for the support. Happy I brightened your day. Edit 2. Thanks kind strangers for the awards. Well, that is some painting your teeth with radium shit. I wonder what our version of it will be. Vaping obviously. It was once common to sell you Peter tanners. They used it to soften hides to make clothing. In the year 892, Sigurd the Mighty of Orkney was feeling pretty proud of himself after killing his foe, Marlbrigd. So proud, in fact, that he cut off Brigd's head and strapped it to his horse's saddle. Unfortunately for Sigurd, he sat in such a way that caused Brigd's teeth to rub against his legs and create an open wound. The wound became infected and Sigurd eventually died as a result. Karma bites. George Washington never knew dinosaurs existed, maybe due to the fact he spent roughly 15% of his money on liquor. I see what you did there. Bodies of victims who had died from plague were used as biological weapons during the Middle Ages. During the siege of Kaffa, bodies of plague victims were catapulted over the city walls to infect the inhabitants by the invading Mongol army. Oh shit, that once again shows the creativity of humans in killing other humans. The most common way to poison a well was to throw a carcass or two down it. Gillis de Rais, Joan of Arc's right-hand man and hero of the 100 Years' War, was executed and had his reputation ruined when it came out that he had been raping and murdering hundreds of children. But to this day almost no one knows that he was more than likely innocent, and was even retried and cleared of wrongdoing in France in 1992. The 1992 part of that is fascinating. Joan of Arc seems like a mythical character to me. That her story would still be evolving in my lifetime of wild. I still maintain that the Jeanne d'Arc story is the single most crazy and insane historical event of all time. If you ran a simulation of Jeanne's life in a computer a million times, how many times does she succeed? The podcast Our Fake History has a really good series on her. Her story is completely mind-boggling. The Anglo-Zanzibar War is the shortest military conflict in history, lasting 38-45 minutes. I learned this recently from a TV show that had nothing to do with history. I bet if they did a documentary on it, the film would be longer than the war itself. That's why I don't watch documentaries on the 30-year war. DW, I'm educated. I've had it in school. A man was once executed in colonial America for bestiality with a pig. The evidence? The piglets looked him, so he must be the father. Man, it must suck to be that guy. How ducking pissed would you be? Unless, of course, he did duck the pig. David Cameron intensifies. In the 90s, following the fall of the Soviet Union, they were low on cash. Therefore Pepsi accepted 17 submarines, a frigate, cruiser and destroyer as payment for their products, giving Pepsi Company one of the largest navies in the world at the time. I still say this should have been the Harrier jet guy's defense. Of course I expected PepsiCo to give me a jet, they own a navy once. The youngest person to ever give birth was a 5-year-old girl. Her name is Lina Marcela Medina de Jurado and she is still alive today. Her son died in his 40s, so she actually outlived the child she gave birth to. To make matters worse, her father is suspected to have fathered the child. That was a confusing and creepy sentence to write. She may have been in her 40s when he died too. Unreal. One pope dug up the previous pope's corpse and put it on trial for corruption, found it guilty, and threw 3 of his finger bones into a river. Didn't they cut off his fingers, rebury him, dig him up again, and throw in him the river? A cat supposedly survived the sinking of the Bismarck and went on to survive 2 more sinkings. Very oversimplified. For more info look up Unsinkable Sam. The cat definitely sunk those ships. In the 13th century, Pope Gregory IX basically declared war on the cats of the world. Yeah, didn't he kinda cause the plague? The Polish army tamed a bear and gave it a rank. LBJ owned a car that could be driven into water, but he wouldn't tell people such as ambassadors and would pretend the brakes had failed and drive into the water as a prank. He also had a massive cock. Lyndon B. Johnson. The most expensive opera costume of all time was worn by Adelina Patti at Covent Garden in 1895. It was worth £15 million. £15 million by today's standards, or 1,895 standards. I'm gonna guess by today's standards, because a £15 million suit in 1895 would cost nearly £2 billion today. Gary Newman is 2 weeks older than Gary Oldman. One that might shock any Brits. Gary Oldman's sister is also an actress, best known for her role as Mo on EastEnders. But can you really be sure it's her, and not just Gary Oldman? 'Cause that man can act. Fidel Castro loves milk and other dairy products so much he got into an argument with a French ambassador over who had better cheese. Imagine if the Dominican Republic had ever started flexing at him about their tobacco quality. Also, pretty bold to keep a beard like that as a dairy aficionado. That a Roman emperor, Caligula, declared war on the sea, or more on their god Neptune, is kinda weird, especially without the historical context. Just imagine a Roman legion standing at the coast, stabbing water with their lances and collecting seashells as war trophies. Edit. Corrected wired to weird. Years later the legionnaires probably told their children they fought a god to sound like the most epic dads ever. Surgery with 300% mortality rate. While amputating the patient's leg at the hip, Liston accidentally sliced through the fingers of one of his assistants. That would have been bad enough, but it proved disastrous when the patient's stump turned gangrenous. The saw must have been contaminated, because the assistant became ill and infected. 2. The procedure was being observed by an elderly doctor in a dress coat with long tails. In the confusion, Liston cut through the man's coat. He wasn't cut, but because blood was spurting around. The old gentleman didn't know that. Feeling the tug, and seeing himself covered in blood, the man collapsed on the floor, had a heart attack, and died. Within a few days, both the patient and the assistant died. This is one of my favorite facts ever. It's absolutely untrue. The story appeared decades after the death of Liston in an article that doesn't provide a source for the story. It's an urban myth and nothing more. The word twerk has been in use since 1820. During World War I, a German armed merchant cruiser called SMS Cap Trafalgar disguised herself as a British converted ocean liner, RMS Carmania, to infiltrate and sink British supply convoys. But not long after leaving port she ran into the actual RMS Carmania, who sunk her after a battle lasting several hours, though Carmania was only barely still afloat herself. There's also accounts that state Carmania was coincidentally disguised as Cap Trafalgar at the same time. But that's unsubstantiated and likely made up to make the story even more bizarre. Spider-Man meme. I like this fact. The first thing that they did after working so hard to disguise herself was become undone. Ireland is the only country to have a smaller population now than it did in the 1840s. This is actually quite sad. You say sad, I say the reason I'd like to move there. Michael Jackson once had several business associates come to visit him for a meeting. While waiting in his lobby, they sat down near a life-size wax figure of him. After an hour or so of waiting, the statue jumped at them, freaking them out. Michael Jackson had pretended to be a statue of himself for over an hour to scare these guys waiting in his lobby. I wonder if he caught them talking any smack about him. Switzerland has accidentally invaded Liechtenstein 3 times. Accidentally, once is an accident, twice is a coincidence, 3 times? That's a pattern. The funny thing is that they did. Once an army corps got lost and made its way into a Liechtensteinian town. Another time they miscalculated the amount of propellant in their missiles and they hit a Liechtenstein forest. And another time that I can't remember. Bro, you actually watched the whole video. I'd give you a high five if I was a human. Make sure to click the like button and subscribe for more great content. See you next time.